Good evening, everybody. I'm Isla Berman, the Director of Architecture for our visitors this evening. Tonight's event is a special event. We are hosting the Royal Institute of British Architects chapter here in San Francisco for a special lecture for them. And I'm going to just, I should first say actually that being a member of the Royal Architectural Institute of Canada myself, I had said to Chad earlier that Canadians are supposed to be the link between the AIA, let's say, and the RIBA. So I'm happy to host this evening. Chad Overway is going to be introducing our lecturer this evening. He is the chairperson of the RIBA chapter in San Francisco. So please welcome Chad this evening.
Thank you. Introductions have been done, so I'll just tell you a little bit about the chapter. We established it in late 2009, and our present membership is about 40 local architects in the Bay Area. And events like this evenings is one of our chapter goals. We want to do excuse me. The idea is that we would try to increase the exposure of British architects and their work in the Bay Area. For those who might be interested in RIBA USA SF chapter, I'll be around through the lecture and be happy to answer any questions that you might have. This evening, Mark has been kind enough to share some of his most recent projects with us. A brief history on Mark is he was born in London, England. His undergraduate education was at Cambridge University in the early 80s, and his postgraduate studies were at Princeton University, where he received a Master's of Architecture. In 1987, Mark opened his practice in New York and now has offices in San Francisco and London. Mark's work is growing considerably and has received worldwide media attention. His work is widely published and has numerous awards, including a Gold Order of Merit presented to him from the Republic of Poland. Mark, welcome and thank you for doing this.
Okay. Thank you very much for this opportunity to talk to you, and thank you to Isla Berman and CCA and Chad Overway of the RIBA. Let's see if I can get this. Yeah, I thought I'd tell you a little bit about myself. I was born in England. As was said, I studied at Cambridge, and I thought it would be a good idea to come and study in the States for 1 year. So I came to Princeton for 1 year, liked it so much, spent a second year, liked that so much, decided to spend 1 year in New York, which became 9 years. I moved to California about 15 years ago because I had some great projects here, and about 7 years ago decided I probably wouldn't have to decide between living here in London or doing projects in either place. I could travel backwards and forwards. So I have a smaller office in London, but technology has meant that most of the work now is done here, although I do go back there every few weeks for meetings and things like that. This is the office near South Park, San Francisco. We wanted it to be more of a sort of studio type office, so we didn't feel we were going to work. And I thought I'd start with a project that means a lot to me, because it's rare that you get a project that you have an emotional connection with. But this is my father at a very young age. He was a fighter pilot, left Poland and was in the RAF in Great Britain. And I had the opportunity to design the Polish Air Force Memorial in Warsaw. They weren't able to do one immediately after the war because the Poles weren't allowed back into Poland. So after the wall, Berlin Wall came down, they had the opportunity to raise funds and build a memorial to the fallen airmen, fallen Polish airmen. There were about 10,000 by the end of the war serving with the RAF. It was a really good opportunity for me because I knew a lot of the veterans and could spend time with them, understanding their ideas, and really got a sense of their sort of energy and youth. So to do a memorial, typically they're quite somber, they're about death and suffering. I realized for these airmen, and their fallen comrades. Actually, they were all young men between 18 and 25 that really needed to give them something that reflected their spirit and energy and sense of hope. We had fantastic location. This is a park in central Warsaw, Pole Mokotowska, which was one of the first airfields in Poland, and some of the last planes took off here when Warsaw was falling to the Germans. So the brief for the project was to create a sort of theatre parade ground for these large ceremonies and events. They needed a location. They'd never really had a proper one, and they have one every year now. We had the opportunity to create this large parade ground. This is the actual memorial itself. It's a mound in the shape, a cross-section of an aerofoil. So there are lots of references to aeroplanes and aeroplane technology. We have a few of these sort of vapor trails that actually are paths in the park, so that they lead you in to the memorial. There's a more formal entrance for ceremonies. It's designed around ceremonies and sort of more sort of one-on-one interaction for the families of the veterans. So here you can see, I think pretty much gives you the whole idea of the memorial, an abstract sculpture representing flight that was supposed to be very light and elegant, and a wall with all the names representing the earth, and both sort of mounted on this aerofoil-shaped mound, elevated to create kind of theatrical space for ceremonies. And there's also a reference to burial mounds from the Middle Ages throughout Europe. This is another image that gives you a more idea of the scale and its setting in the park. The engineering for the sculpture was very difficult, stainless steel, and getting it manufactured was very hard. We found someone who made reactor vessels, stainless steel reactor vessels for refineries, but most architectural metal workers wouldn't be able to do something like this. Here's another image showing you the scale. And you can see the sculpture, you have a better idea of it, this idea of abstract representation of flight and spirit. It's designed to be seen from obviously the parade ground, but also walking around it. You get different views, different sense of its sculptural quality. The metal itself has got a very sort of beautiful patina to it. They had to grind it, and it's a sort of semi-industrial finish, but I like the roughness and the way it catches the light compared with the highly polished granite. It was very nice to be able to work with very solid materials. The granite wall is solid granite. Turned out to be not that much more expensive than a concrete wall clad with granite. So each of these granite slabs is about 3 feet by 3 feet by 12 feet high, solid granite. This is the steel yard, and I got to work with my father on the project. He's a structural engineer, and we collaborated on the design. This is us at the steel yard. I put this shot in because I think it gives you an idea of how the memorial is used for public ceremonies. On the left are the media, on the right are the honor guard from the three services, and I took the picture from where I was sitting, so the audience is on either side. It's quite a sort of big media event, laying of wreaths, military parade. But I also realized, well, I didn't realize till after it was built, just how much it meant to people living there, having their relatives' names on the walls. It seems like a very primal thing that is very important to people to be memorialized. And it was very moving to see people coming up, touching it, leaving candles, and they haven't been able to do this since the war, so very important to them. And it was memorialized in a book for the veterans. Next, change of gear completely. About a third of our work is commercial retail, and that's actually a lot of fun. I thought I'd give you a brief overview of our project so you can get an idea of the firm, and then go through the projects that are currently in construction or about to go into construction. This is one of the projects we've done in retail. This is for Virgin. It was their first freestanding store that was designed for them or with them. That was a lot of fun. I got to meet Richard Branson, who's quite a character. And we had to, this was actually quite a hard project because, if I go to the next slide, the site was only about 50 feet wide, and we had to give them a lot of visibility to persuade them to move to, this is actually in Sacramento, and they currently were in New York, San Francisco, Tokyo, London. So to go to Sacramento, they needed quite an incentive. Part of it was a huge billboard of a building. And so one of the ways we got around the narrow site was to cantilever a portion of the second floor over the neighboring building. The actual space itself is only stops here. So that was quite a fun project to do. Again, it was really creating a landmark identity for Virgin. I think there were 2 or 3 television stations there at the opening, so it sort of had the effect that the client wanted. This is space inside the building, one of the few retail spaces that you can actually look out from. I think the iconography speaks for itself on some of these elements. This is a large 100,000 square foot center in Roseville, Rocky Ridge in Roseville, and we would try to create something that was more like an urban street, building 100,000 square feet of new shop space around parking is quite a challenge. So to create something that had a sort of the feeling of an urban landscape was very important to us. And creating public space, a plaza here based around the food court at the heart of the center. This is one in Davis. Again, it was very important to create public space. This is a mixed-use project in Sacramento, lofts above retail, in a very gritty part of the city. There's a new rapid transit system that just went in, light rail, and this was one of the first sort of pioneering developments in this area. So it was very important to create something that had that sort of urban edge, drama to it. And people were very hesitant about putting residential above retail in this area, but I'm surprised it's done quite well and it's fully leased. So we're very happy with that. Here's some of the details of the lofts. Again, trying to create a sort of urban street edge and variety in the form for what were really large shell boxes, but giving them an identifiable urban image, I think is very important for the community. This is another, this is near Virgin. This is it's about 800-foot long shopping centre that we got to build in front of, create new frontage for. And this was the main heart of the complex, which is a theatre. We had fun with this because the idea is that this is a glass facade and you can project images onto the back of it. The technology is nearly there. The idea is that they'll be able to project previews of the movies so that you have light and movement and drama on this facade. At the moment, we have an LED system. The owner's fascinated with technology and enjoyed working on this. You can change the color scheme from anywhere in the world. There are cameras in the parking lot. You can go online and change the color scheme. They were talking at one time about having competitions for artists to come up with different displays. At the moment, it fades very slowly through a spectrum, but it changes different times of the year. This is a building at the other end of the center, which anchors the other end. It sort of mirror images Virgin in a way. It's a similar counterweight to this very long center. Then moving on to something very different. About a third of our work is institutional. museums and public buildings, and unfortunately most of it doesn't get built. It doesn't seem as though it's just us. This is one of the first projects I worked on. This is when I was working for Arons, Burton and Correlec in London, ABK, and when I was working with them, I was quite young and starting out. We won the competition to build this project out of about 200 entries. I mean, it was their design. I was learning a lot working there, and Prince Charles disliked it so much, called it, this is the one that's the famous carbuncle on the face of an old friend, I think he called it. So basically it killed the project, nearly destroyed their firm, and at that point I thought perhaps it's time to come and live in another country for a while, so I came to study at Princeton. I was quite hard on the project myself, I think, when I worked there, being quite young, and you sort of think you know a lot at that age. But in hindsight, when I look at this, I find it quite a handsome building, and I wish they'd built it. The current scheme is very different because of the architectural climate in those days. It was eventually completed by Venturi, and I wouldn't criticize it, but it was a very, very different approach. He chose to use a lot of the traditional historicist detailing of the building on the new one, and then use that detailing in a sort of playful way. But still, I find it feel it's a shame that the committee then didn't have the strength of mind to go with a modernist building. I worked on for Michael Graves for a while on the Whitney Museum extension. Again, not built, but it was a very good learning experience for me. I had 2 projects now where I really saw the mechanics of putting museums together. I think they're about as complicated as doing a hospital or something. There's a lot of functional requirements. This is an early design of my own for the competition for the New Orleans Museum of Art extension. I had my own opportunity to do a design for the National Gallery extension, and I got to present this to Sir Jacob Rothschild, who was on the committee for selecting the next architect after ABK. And I sent the design to Prince Charles and got a nice letter from his secretary saying that unfortunately he was too busy to meet, but he thought it was very nice. So I should frame that. But this is my own project for the Crocker Museum in Sacramento. This is probably coming more up to date with work in California. We were trying to create it's a very traditional museum that needed to be quadrupled in size, and so we were really trying to create a sort of iconic form for Sacramento. It was a regional museum. It has a very good collection, and I think it deserved a very sort of striking, bold building to put it on the map. This is the site, and this is an early sort of study in color. Just some basic ideas, but here's the existing museum. This is the project we were planning, and then there was a plan for a second building for a performing arts center. And between the two, I was hoping to create this sort of public park piazza space. The evening weather there is very benign, very pleasant. So the idea of external public space is a great amenity there. Here's a model. You get a sense it's quite an anthropomorphic building. I think it's something that would provide an image for the museum, an identifiable image. The museum's also quite close to the river, and so we actually thought it would be fun to have this one blank facade. There's a freeway there and then the river, and we thought, one, the facade had to be blank because of the freeway, but two, there's so much functionally going on certain sides of the museum, loading docks and storage areas, and you can't always articulate every side of the building. So we thought it would be fun to come up with a playful form with otherwise blank walls. Here's a quick watercolor of it. Having done the memorial in Warsaw, we were invited to do a limited competition for Museum of Aviation in Krakow. It's I didn't know before, but it's a big center for aviation in Europe. It probably has the largest collection of early planes in the world, a lot of First World War planes, and then it represents history by going right through and having a huge collection of MiGs from the Soviet days. Quite impressive, although they're all sitting in fields and rotting away, or they were at the time. So the idea was to create a new museum within the airfield. The airfield's used for major air shows every year. It's a big event, but they had no central building that sort of gave them an entrance or any kind of identity. Plus, they needed space to exhibit the aircraft, and parallel with that, and equal in size, they're very well known for restoration and education in the field of aviation. So this is a sketch of the project, a couple of sketches. The idea was to represent these two main functions with two overlapping wings, obviously giving the building a very figurative form, being representative of and identifiable from the air and the ground, but also representing the two functions, the idea of this sort of educational pod, which is sheltered underneath the larger wing. You'll see in some of the other sketches, and the interdependence of the two, but the dependence of the two as well. Here's a section. Gave us the opportunity to create very high space to hang the aircraft. It's a kind of aircraft hangar type construction with hanging points so the planes could be suspended as if in flight. And then these are the sort of educational research facilities, library, lecture halls. The vertical circulation we kept out on the outside of this pod, and you'll see in some of the images I've got, it's open, it's steel, it's a bit like a industrial factory type construction with gangways and catwalks, so that you can actually walk up amongst the planes. There are catwalks that go out over the planes, so that you can actually see them as if in flight. So an animation here, the two wings. But obviously we wanted something very sculptural that would really speak to anyone driving past. Here's the pod on the right, all the admin and educational facilities. It's the gangplanks, gangwalks, metal stairs, elevator takes you up amongst the planes. To the right you see a catwalk there. Unfortunately the video ends, but gives you an idea of the space. And I think just being able to move amongst the planes three-dimensionally is very important. The current museum, they're all sitting on the ground, and they look a little clumsy. There's a sort of elegance and beauty to them once they're suspended. There's the catwalk above. I'll go through these quickly. These are some of the stills. Here you can see the organizing feature of the project. Here's some stills in the interior, entrance. There you can see the elevator with the catwalks suspended out amongst the planes. I'll go through these very quickly because I think they're pretty visible in the animation. I just have one shot of this. This is a very early project. We had quite a wild commission to design a university for the Kabbalah in Israel. This is before they were trendy. And it was actually fascinating working with them. They had dreams of this huge campus university surrounded by housing, a monorail, a hotel, workshops, completely self-sufficient with a farm. Unfortunately, it only got as far as funding, starting funding. This is a project nearer to home. we were part of a group invited to, actually we were part of 4 finalists to interview for a new Museum of Performing Arts and Design. And I managed to persuade Mikhail Baryshnikov to partner with us to collaborate on a concept for the project. And we really looked at trying to portray the performing arts in a building. How do you capture that drama and spirit? The concept for the museum was to really bring in a younger generation and the next generation into the performing arts, make them realize it's exciting, let them participate in some way with some of the exhibits. And this is something Mikhail Baryshnikov is very interested in, especially working with young children. I think he was about 15 when he was discovered, but he was dancing probably at 5 or 6, and it's unbelievable. So I started sketching some of these ideas, very dynamic, free-flow dance movement, how that might translate into a language for a building. And again, the idea was that this would appeal to and be readable across cultural, educational, and age barriers. So we started folding paper, planes. We started, first time I met Baryshnikov was in Paris, and we met a couple of times in New York after that. But we soon realized that this sort of form could actually represent not just dance and movement, but throughout the performing arts, there are many sort of other areas that this thing could represent and reflect. Here's the building, it's Howard and Third, designed for the building on the site. And again, hopefully that's readable. Obviously it had to be out there, very different, very striking, really trying to create a landmark. There are quite a few other museums that have a very different character. I think it was very important that this one be dynamic and exciting and appeal to people perhaps that wouldn't be so interested in architecture, perhaps for very young children. Or we had some ideas that the night visibility of it was very important and always considered in the design. We thought about projecting images and using different kinds of lighting, some of the LED lighting that we've used on other buildings. Here, there's the model from different angles. But it was very important that it look exciting from all sides, with this sort of wild, abstract form. It's quite a busy location architecturally, with parking lots and various other buildings. So to have something quite dramatic itself, really just by changing the form so it contrasts against the neighbours, made it stand out. And I think that was very important for us. I'll move on to some of our more commercial projects. We were in a limited competition which we won for a United Nations building in Beijing. This was a number of years ago. I was partnered with MCA International, a firm now based in China, and this was for the first United Nations building in Beijing. It was for the UN Forestry Commission, and they were very concerned that it be very green. They were looking at renewable resources themselves, such as bamboo and rattan, and so we had to do, very interested in doing a building that was pretty green for the time. Very narrow footplate for the floors so that all the spaces are naturally lit. One of the first buildings there to have operable windows, so that you could also get cross ventilation, natural ventilation, but also to create a sort of striking building for them. This was going to be their first, and it was being paid for by the Chinese government. In fact, when more people in the government found out it was for the UN, the program was changed, the budget was increased. Never had that happen before. And they decided they wanted a lot more stone. So it's strange working there, but very interesting. fantastic place to visit. You'll probably be able to see some of the operable windows, some of these shots. Anyway, I was quite surprised to see that on a glass scan. It just looks incongruous, but worked very well. After that, we were invited to do another competition for a city hall in Bao'an, which is near Shenzhen, near Hong Kong. And this was a fun project. The idea of government was being more open and visible was relatively new. And also the idea of creating new symbols for government rather than the old ones was very important to them. This was in the free trade zone, so it was sort of a new world then. So the idea of being able to see into the chamber, to see the debates, glass, transparency, accountability, they're all new ideas that I think they found very appealing, and creating some idea of a new symbol for the region. This is a high-rise building. I had a client in Sacramento and had a very large site, so I partnered with Gensler in San Francisco to come up with these ideas. I'll go through these very quickly, but there were two options for the site. This is a much smaller project, but closer to home. This is a clay and sandstone, 450 sandstone. But it was a very interesting project for us because the existing building was quite a quiet, unassuming 70s building that people weren't that fond of. 40% leased, but it had a large plaza in front of it that wasn't very usable. It was full of wheelchair ramps and stairs and planters. It was very hard to get in and out. The retail spaces were dying because they were very awkward to reach. And so the owner had, he wanted to renovate the building. And through discussion, we realized that it's probably worth spending the money on a new entrance pavilion, much smaller area than the 17 stories above it. And it was his idea to create some very sculptural glass piece that would be visible from a distance and really change the corner. And so this is what we came up with based on his proposal. But we lowered the entrance to street level, created sort of semi-public space by the use of a lot of glass. It's the shading canopy above obviously helps to shade it, but creates a sort of sculptural element that you can see from several blocks away. I think it's really changed the corner. It's probably really changed the building to something quite identifiable. Here's some more images of it. It was fun to play with the glass and fastener system, and you see the shading above. The photographer really liked this one because he managed to get in a reflection of the Transamerica building, which I hadn't seen, but night view is obviously very important. Lighting, set off the street corner. This is via the lobby. This is before the artwork went in. The owner has a very large art collection, was very keen to have this space. I have to rephotograph it now, but I couldn't resist doing it without the art. I just find it very pure and quiet compared with the hustle and bustle of downtown. The other portion of our work, about a third of our work, is residential. And this is a project we got to do in Carmichael, which is basically Sacramento. It's on the river, but we had the opportunity to create a sort of man-made lake or large pond underneath the building. The owner wanted a pavilion, really a garden pavilion, to enjoy this new garden that they were building. And so it was very important to have this sort of feel and sense of inside-outside. So the idea was that the walls melt away, you're suspended between this cantilevered floor and this massive cantilevered roof. I think it's about a 30-foot cantilever. But obviously the weather's very harsh there, it gets very hot, very strong sunshine. This faces south, but the idea of the large cantilever is it keeps almost all the summer sun out and lets in the winter sun. So it actually works very well, and the space stays very cool. We added some fun features like the open Oculus to lighten the form, make it a little more sculptural, and makes it a bit more playful. There's a patch of sunlight that moves across the floor surprisingly quickly. I've never watched a sundial, but it's amazing how quickly the lighting patterns in the room change throughout the day, reflected from the water and then onto the ceiling. There's quite a sense of drama in that, being immersed in nature. Some of the interior shots will probably show that a bit better. Here you get the idea of this sculptural piece cantilevered out over the water. You do get the sense when you're in there that you're over water. There's actually a portion of the floor that's glass. It's quite funny, as you walk over it, all the koi fish come up to you because the owner walks that way when they go to feed the fish. So whenever the fish see people coming, they can see them through the glass, and it's very bizarre to be standing over them. The west face of the building is quite solid because that's obviously the hardest to control for sunlight. That gives you a sense of the cantilever. Here's the space. It's filled out a lot more since these photographs are taken. It's a very flexible space. They more or less live in here now, but they have a large art collection which they rotate through here. They do a lot of fundraisers. So it's a very flexible space for entertaining, fundraising, showing art, living. But you do get a good sense in this picture of being immersed in this new landscape that they built. Ed Haig was the landscape architect for this project. It's a very, very quiet room. This actually is a fun element. It was important to screen part of the house so that when you're in this room, you're basically looking towards the river views and the pond. The whole plan actually curves and widens as it goes out to give you those views. But to restrict your view back towards the house, we developed this sort of louver system, which is clear glass this way and then frosted glass on the other side of the louver, which actually makes a great backdrop for displaying some of the sculptural work. I'll show these very quickly. We're really surprised. We've been published a fair amount, but this one project just seems to keep getting published. That was in England, that's in Russia, San Francisco magazine, Hungary, Germany, China, Asia, Germany, and a couple we haven't put on there. I suppose there are just a few images that capture people's imagination. It'd be nice to do that with some of our other projects. This is another house that's been built in Carmichael. This is an early sketch showing some of the ideas. The house sits on the river opposite the state park, so it has fantastic views, but quite a busy road and fairly close to the road. So the idea was to create a sort of blank face to the house, very private face, garages here, with an entrance court. Not a complete court, semicircular, but it either brings you in by car or brings you in walking. And then you pass through this very solid wall into a little enclosed courtyard, which is almost entirely koi pond with planting. And you hear the sound of running water. And you cross over a bridge into the house. So there is this sort of process of arrival and sequence through the house from public to private. And this is the private space of the house. This is the garage and some guest rooms, but this is the living room, owner's bedroom, and the main living room, and with views out. And I suppose the two organizational features are very important to this house. The very long wall for their artwork that helps you orient yourself within the space, which is nearly 100 feet long, I think, and then gives you the views of the river. I'll walk you through this in a little more detail. Here's the plan. You can see the river and trees. Here's the courtyard and this wall. I'll go straight on to the pictures because I think they give you a better sense. This is the entrance. This is the view from the street. And as you walk along this curved wall, This is looking back towards the street. And there are a few windows that give you a sort of preview of this bridge entry to the house. This is looking back towards the entrance from that bridge. And here you can see the entry bridge and the main entrance to the house. And this corridor, or this curved wall, I should say, that goes right through the house. So no matter what room you're in, you can always reorient yourself to the house because of the curved wall. All the rooms are open, or can be opened, so you can see from one end of the house to the other. But there are sliding doors to close off certain areas, like the bedroom, if you want to. But they live there alone, so it's left open most of the time. And you can see that the space. This is the main living room, and views of the state park across the river. It's a very quiet space, very tranquil. So they nature lovers. The husband has lots of telescopes and binoculars. He's a big bird watcher, so it's a perfect location for him. And I just love this location on the river with the state park. I mean, it's just so tranquil and beautiful. And the house, again, facing south with the large overhangs, allows the large areas of glass. There's another view of the house and its context. Well, really sculpture and a landscape, I think. So we feel of it. This is a project that's nearly finished. This is the site. And absolutely fantastic site at Lake Tahoe. I think it's about 260 steps down to the lake with 180-degree views. Incredibly difficult to build on, 45-degree slopes, entrance at street level, and then the whole house beneath you. So the concept for the house was really about how to take advantage, obviously, of the views, but also to make a form for the house visible from the street. Very little of it's visible from the street, but the rooftop at the house. This is the entrance garage, stair tower connecting 5 levels, and then the living space. And the idea was to create these fanning roofs that and forms below that fan out with views of the lake, and yet break up the large form of the house, but give you a facade to the street that's these curved, undulating roofs that fan out and overlap. You'll see that in a second. This is another sketch. Here's the view from the road. And I think this animation probably gives you the best idea of the house. Very rugged forms. One of the requirements was that the house be very fragmented to prevent reflections back to Lake Tahoe. So a lot of the windows are angled forward and lots of deep overhangs. Dark materials again, so that the house, there's a lot of rock outcrops and the house disappears for most of the year. Even in the snow, there's a lot of rock around. We haven't shown the trees on this. This is actually pretty wild. There's a glass stair. It's a 5-story stair to link all the parts of the house. So the idea was to make it this very attractive sort of sequence down of arrival with views out over the lake. And there's a glass elevator at one end of it. So that you'll see that in a second, as you arrive and come down, you have these spectacular views out of the lake. But this is a very important sort of organizing feature of the house because it's on so many levels. These prow-shaped balconies, the ones that face towards the lake. You can see that's the view. And this is the elevator going back up. Go to the next. I'll go through these. These are stills from the animation. I'll go through very quickly. This is quite fun. It's the view from the top of the site looking down. These are very early construction shots. You can see how hard it is to work on a site like this. That's think you can just make it out. There's a tractor here. They had to build a site for a crane. This is hard to see at first, but here's that same tractor. This is the retaining wall. It's about 45 feet deep. Unbelievable. Steel going up. This was about 12 months ago. But it shows you some of the idea of the sculptural quality of the roofs, but I think spectacular views of the lake. Here's the framework going in for the fanned roofs. From below, you can see it's very fragmented, very rock-like, dark materials. These are more recent shots. Nearly completed. But every room, because of the fanning, every room has different views out towards the lake, which was very important to the owner. And the aerial view, you can see copper hasn't gone on yet, but you can see the fanning of the roofs and the visibility from the road. Very, very simple, very small, just the entrance and the garage. This is a house that we're supposed to begin construction in the spring. Just finished the drawings, hopefully get a building permit for this soon. It's in Sacramento. It's one of the few changes in grade that they have there. So we had to make the best of this fantastic site that had a little bluff in it. And so I played with a lot of ideas of cantilevered forms on the edge of this bluff, and which is quite a substantial grade terrain grade change for Sacramento. And this is the design we came up with for that. Basically, main double-height living room right the way through, a cantilevered bedroom. Actually, the fun thing here, I haven't got a picture of it, but there's an infinity swimming pool that goes all the way along the edge here, so you wouldn't need any handrails. And the owner likes to swim laps. We have a little animation of this, I think. Someone had fun doing the car. I'll go through here with some stills. Very quickly, this is a house in Woodside. I enjoyed doing this. It's a very small house. Should begin construction shortly. We're just getting a building permit. And but it was just fun to work on a very simple, small house with just one or two moves in it, very clean, just wood and plaster. This is a project that I've been working on for a long time in London. It's next to, this is Mountford House, which is a Grade 2 listed building, a historical landmark, which made everything very complicated. And this is Barnsbury Square, a big garden square in Islington in London. Our site is through block, so it's quite a big site. One of the hard things about the site is it's large and you have to really maximize density in London, but how do you bring in light and air? How do you make it livable? They're lofts. They're going to be sold as empty shells. People will come in and build their own interiors. So we created this sort of garden court in the center, basically filled the site entirely with building, but just cut out this one area to provide light and air and attractive views of this green garden. The other thing that we did that I think is fairly novel for a building like this is took an old idea, which is the sunken garden level. A lot of Victorian houses would take the soil from the garden and the foundations and throw it up for the street, so that you enter at the piano nobile, the first floor, you'd say, and below that would be a basement level, which is really on grade with the garden. So when you're in the basement, the garden you walk straight out into it. By doing that, we were able to increase in here, provide another level of residential. I think it's probably better seen in this image. So when you're in the garden, it just feels like a 4-story building, which is very common in that area, and a quiet green space. The facade of this building, we had some fun with how to do a modern building in a very traditional context. The nice thing about the square is that although it had a very fixed street wall on all 4 sides that made it a London square, every building was very different. Every building was when it was designed and built, was considered contemporary for that era. So we thought this should be an opportunity for us to provide something of our era and not try and do something historicist. And luckily and surprisingly, we were supported by the conservation officer and the architect advising the planners. So it was quite a slog, but we got this approved. One of the features of the facade was that the glazed areas, we looked at traditional buildings. I have an example right next here, which would traditionally be solid wall, open window, and then the window would have a series of layers of coverings. Net curtains, traditionally for privacy during the day, solid curtains for privacy and light control at night, perhaps some shutters, all very fixed. Well, we thought, what if you could create a kind of intelligent skin for a building that all of these functions would be movable, and the occupants could decide where they were, where the walls were, where the windows were, where the shading and the shutters. So we came up with this idea of layering the facade with, but on a modular basis, with panels, so that the first line would be solid wood panels for light control. The next line would be shades during the day for visual control. You can see through one way, not the other. They're a bit like lace curtains, I suppose, but it's an etched pattern onto the glass. Obviously, sliding glass panels, and then exterior balcony, again, with these etched panels that you can move and locate for privacy. I think it gives the building a sort of texture and a proportion in keeping with the neighbours. And this was the night view. We thought the idea of this layering and texturing could be quite fun. Constantly changing sort of abstract canvas representing really what was going on inside the building. So I think that's probably brings us up to date with what we're working on at the moment. That certainly is the end of the slides. So it's probably a good time to stop. Thank you very much. Thank you.
How are some of these buildings in Carmichael, California, how are they greeted by the local agencies that you're going through?
Initially, it was very hard. I mean, I was a foreigner in two ways. One, coming from New York, and second, being English and with a strange Polish name. So it was a little hard. Nothing like that had been built before, really. But surprisingly, I think they realized, especially for the commercial projects, just how earnest we were to do something of quality, and that the owner, the developer, was really concerned to do something interesting. And so I think the first project, they probably did it on trust. I mean, they really tried to persuade us to do traditional sort of Victorian architecture. So, I mean, some of the planners said, well, but you have such nice clock towers in England, can't you do a nice old clock tower? I mean, literally. And so I think there was a level of trust, and after the first project, I think they were quite pleased with it. And so actually some of the planning departments used those projects as examples in their book, design guideline book, which is really surprising considering all the pressure and resistance we got at the beginning. But I think just the fact we were trying to do something of quality, that we really cared about it, made the big difference.
Are you using these excellent graphics that you're showing? Is that what you're using as you go through this planning?
A little bit. I actually find people respond more to the sketches, because that's more how we think. The graphics come later, when we're sort of quite a long way down the road. And the graphics, you almost need to know how wide the window mullions are before you can move on. Whereas with sketches, you can really, with a piece of charcoal, you can, as they joke, you can redesign Paris in an hour, right, with a piece of charcoal. But if you want to do it as a three-dimensional rendering, it's going to take you the rest of your life. So, yeah, I think hand sketches people still find are more understandable. And models. We use a lot of models, which I don't have here. We do a lot of rough sketch models in cardboard and paper, and I think people respond very well. They understand those much more than computer graphics, which are really two-dimensional. It's just an illusion because they move that you think they're 3, whereas a model you can actually hold up and has a physicality to it. And that's how we design, actually, really more in model form than using 3-dimensional computer imaging. But these are fun. It's like watching TV.
I think what is interesting in having gone through a number of these reviews, and some people being, burnt in flames as they're going through, as they're
Right.
modernists, it's impressive that you've been able to get through these courses. Watched being part of the scene, watched them just being burned at the stake.
Yes, it's a problem everywhere. I mean, in London, they think it's easy in California, and in California, they think it's easy in New York. But everywhere, it's the same. I thought it was easier in France, but I have a client from there now, and he was trying to do a house in the south of France, and he said it's the same. The planners are just so difficult. They don't want to change. People are afraid of change, I think. That's the problem.
Particularly the Tahoe project.
The Tahoe one was very difficult. That's a remodel.
Oh.
No, I'm joking. I mean, there was an existing house on the site. We had to go through the process of it being sort of, there isn't a molecule left at the house, but it went through.
It's funny to see that emerging market, to see it.
Yeah, I think it's persistence. I mean, we really had to work with the planners and persuade and show them, we did show them mock-ups and a lot of color renderings. I mean, that was actually after the design, which I suppose you were asking me about, really, how do you get the planners on board? And part of it was showing a lot of color images to showing how this building will disappear. They didn't bring them, but it's very odd that the dark color makes it disappear. It goes into the shadows. So that was a requirement. I would have loved to do sort of this white, shining building, but I quite like the dark now. It sort of gives it a sort of quite a modernist flavour to it.
What are those dark walls made of?
Believe it or not, they're wood, and we've never seen a product like that before. It's almost like butcher block. It's slabs of wood cut small, glued back together, and stained. And they've tested them, and I've never seen a product used like that. So the contractor definitely guarantees that they'll be around for a long time. But we didn't want to use plywood, and we didn't want to use any kind of siding. It wasn't the right look. So we talked about precast at one point, but it's actually a dark stained wood. So hopefully it will hold up. Excellent. Time for a drink? Thanks very much. Thank you.